man brought his illegitimate daughter back home. When the uncle and his wife saw the little girl's skin color, they were utterly shocked.
Her mother is dead. I beg you, uncle, love her as I would were I here, and ensure that she is in receipt of all that is due to her as a child of mine.
That is simply impossible.
What is right can never be impossible.
She is black.
She is my blood.
But she is black.
A detail you chose not to share with us. Do you have in mind my position, my reputation?
Sir,
I am the Lord Chief Justice.
Have some sense of propriety, boy, and understand what it is you are asking.
She is a mulatto.
But the uncle's wife softened instantly when she saw this helpless girl with nowhere to go. She asked the girl for her name. The man told the girl that he loved her as deeply as he loved his own mother, but because he was bound by military orders, he had no choice but to return to the front lines once again. He kissed his daughter and left with great reluctance. The girl's name was Belle. After her father left, Lord Mansfield, the Lord Chief Justice, and his wife cared for Belle with great affection, having never had children of her own. His wife also adopted another niece named Elizabeth. Under their equal care, the two girls grew up healthy and well provided for. Elizabeth became Belle's only friend. However, due to deeply rooted traditional beliefs, whenever guests arrived at the estate, Belle was not allowed to appear at the dining table and share a meal with them. One day, Mansfield called Belle into his study and told her devastating news. It turned out that Belle's father had recently died in battle, but he had transferred all of his property and wealth to her. As Belle was overwhelmed with grief, Elizabeth said to her, although Belle had lost her father, she had inherited an immeasurable fortune. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's own father had refused to acknowledge her existence even on the day he died, leaving her with nothing. One day, Mansfield hosted the Duke of Ashford and his family at his home. The dining room flickered with candlelight as Elizabeth happily chatted with James, the Duke's eldest son. Meanwhile, Belle could only sit alone in the drawing room. After dinner, the guests gradually made their way into the drawing room. Upon seeing Belle for the first time, the Duchess could not help but murmur under her breath,
I've no idea she would be so black.
Mansfield, however, introduced Belle with confidence and openness. Elizabeth proudly told Belle that James, the Duke's eldest son, would inherit most of their family's fortune, and he seemed very interested in her as well. On the other side, James showed clear prejudice against Belle, while his younger brother Oliver found her captivating. Oliver's gaze lingered on Belle the entire time. Seeing her son's unusual behavior, Oliver's mother slowly walked over and warned him.
She is an heiress.
Although exceptions can be made.
It is said her father left her a rather vast fortune.
I mean to say, if that is your inclination.
She is rather soft on the eye. I've thought no further of it, Mamma.
Where do you get your information?
Her sister cousin has a rather fast tongue.
What Belle did not know was that a young assistant named John, who worked under Mansfield, had been quietly observing her. The way John looked at her was gentle and free of any traditional prejudice. He told Belle that he and Mansfield were handling a case, the world-famous Zong ship incident. A shipping company had murdered 132 black people on board in order to claim insurance money. They falsely claimed that during the voyage, a shortage of fresh water had caused the 132 laborers to fall gravely ill and die. Belle was deeply shocked after hearing this. John did not believe such a claim, and he felt deep sorrow for those 132 innocent lives. Looking at her own skin in the mirror and recalling John's words, Belle could not hold back her tears. The next day, Belle went to find John and begged him to make the truth public, as she longed for the day justice would prevail. When Mansfield learned that John had told Belle about the case they were handling, he was furious. He immediately decided to dismiss John and warned him to stay away from Belle. Before leaving, John confronted Mansfield with a piercing question. You claim to cherish your adopted daughter the most, yet you hide her away and deny her a social life. I may only be the humble son of a clergyman, but I believe that by refusing to let her sit at the table and forcing her into isolation, your actions are no different from those who treated the laborers on the Zong ship as if they were worth only 30 pounds. So how much more honorable are you, in the prime of her youth? Although Belle possessed great wealth, her dark skin caused her to be excluded in every social setting. Mansfield understood the awkwardness of Belle's position, and while he loved her deeply, he was also deeply concerned about her prospects for marriage. Families of high society would not accept her, while those of lower status could not hope to match her standing. Mansfield had even planned that if Belle never married, he would leave his estate for her to manage. Not long after, at the invitation of the Duchess of Ashford, Elizabeth and Belle visited their estate. Oliver had always been intrigued by the melancholic Belle, Regarding this controversial young woman, Oliver asked his father what he thought of her. The Duke of Ashford replied meaningfully that it would depend on how much fortune she possessed. With his father's approval, Oliver began to pursue Belle passionately. However, his brother warned him to always be mindful of his reputation. Oliver paid no attention to his brother's warning. That very night, he eagerly confessed his love to Belle. As they admired the romantic fireworks together, Belle unexpectedly encountered John again. This moment was witnessed by Elizabeth. Belle asked John about the progress of the Zong ship case and said that if he needed any help, she would support him without hesitation. A month later, after learning that Belle possessed a vast inheritance, Oliver formally proposed to her. Belle did not wish to spend her life alone, and considering the prominent social status of the Ashford family, she believed that such a marriage might finally set her life on the right path. She accepted his proposal on the spot. Meanwhile, Belle continued to closely follow the progress of the Zong ship case. When she discovered that the ship in question had passed through 5 supply ports during its voyage, the excuse of a lack of fresh water completely fell apart. Eagerly, Belle rushed out, determined to deliver this evidence to John. After making inquiries through the coachman, they finally found John in a cafe. With nowhere else to go in the city, they discussed the case inside the carriage. John was deeply moved by Belle's courage and intelligence. On the way back home, they had their first heartfelt conversation. Belle could not understand why a woman without a dowry or inheritance could only rely on a man to elevate her status. Yet even with wealth, she herself was bound by countless restrictions. She admitted that she had accepted Oliver's proposal not out of love, but because he was the first white man who did not reject her, and in a moment of emotion, she agreed. John suddenly seemed a little disheartened, and he advised Belle that for the sake of her lifelong happiness, she should take more time to truly understand Oliver before deciding on marriage. Meanwhile, Oliver's brother James had always been dissatisfied with this engagement. During an outing, he seized the opportunity to humiliate Belle.
You have ensnared my brother. Tell me, are you to share his dining room as well as his bed?
Oh, Mr. James, your manners are as poor as your brother's finances.
And have no further use for your impoverished cousin.
At that moment, Belle saw Oliver in the distance, flirting intimately with another young woman behind her back. As Belle moved forward to confront Oliver, James suddenly grabbed her arm violently and behaved in a disrespectful manner, insulting her with clear disdain. Belle was left frozen in place by his aggressive behavior. Thinking of her cousin Elizabeth, who deeply admired James, Belle did not want her to marry into such a family. She told Elizabeth everything about James's rude and disgraceful actions. However, Elizabeth mistakenly believed that Belle had selfish motives and was trying to prevent her from marrying into wealth. She lashed back at Belle without hesitation.
The brother of the man you are to marry is not appropriate for me.
He does not desire you, Bet. Or at least, even if he does, you would regret such a mistake. He laid his hands on me, Bet, in the most ungentlemanly fashion.
Why should you say such a thing?
He hurt me.
You are a liar. You are beneath him.
I am beneath him.
Yes.
It turned out that even in the heart of her closest cousin, Belle's identity was seen as something unworthy. Belle was deeply hurt. Determined to defend the dignity of people of color, Belle began meeting John more frequently. However, one day, Mansfield discovered their meetings. He got into Belle's carriage ahead of time. When John stepped in, Mansfield warned him once again. He believed that such meetings would ruin Belle's reputation, but John was not intimidated and firmly pushed back against Mansfield. During the argument, John boldly declared his love for Belle.
I love her! I love her with every breath I breathe!
After returning home, Mansfield found himself struggling between tradition and the inhumane laws filled with injustice. His wife's words left him in deep reflection. She said that while they protected their status among the powerful, they had ignored the truth that all human beings should be equal. Yet in preserving their position, everyone had forgotten their original principles. Since they treated Belle as their own daughter, they should have the courage to make a judgment for fairness and justice. The next day, Belle decided to break off her engagement with Oliver. Oliver's mother was furious and once again attacked Belle because of her skin color. But Belle responded firmly. Her skin color was not something to be ashamed of. What was truly shameful was their lack of dignity and their failure to treat anyone around them with sincerity. They were not superior, and she was not inferior. Seeing Belle's courage, Mansfield finally let go of all his burdens. When a painter was creating a portrait of Belle and Elizabeth, the original composition had Belle kneeling beside Elizabeth, but Mansfield instructed the painter to change it so that they sat as equals. A month later, Elizabeth learned that James had married another wealthy woman, and only then did she understand Belle's true intentions. The two reconciled. Belle made a decision to give part of her inheritance to Elizabeth as a dowry, in an era where a dowry determined a woman's prospects for marriage. This gave Elizabeth far greater confidence. Meanwhile, the trial date for the Zong ship case finally arrived. Disguised, Belle slipped into the courtroom. At that time, Britain dominated global trade and showed little concern for the rights of black laborers. Because of Belle's presence, the royal authorities began to question whether Mansfield, as the presiding judge, could still uphold the principle of prioritizing trade above all else. Mansfield found himself caught in a dilemma during the trial. On that day, major newspapers closely followed the outcome of the case. Even though everyone knew that the 132 laborers had been unjustly persecuted, the renowned lawyers still insisted that they had died from illness and contagion. However, in the face of compelling evidence presented by those seeking justice, Mansfield withstood immense pressure. He ruled that the insurance fraud claim was valid and that the laborers had been deliberately drowned. He also publicly declared that slavery should have been abolished long ago. Standing among the crowd, Belle shed tears of overwhelming emotion. Mansfield realized that John was the only man who truly cared for Belle. He no longer opposed their relationship and even took John back as his apprentice. At last, the two young lovers reunited, and they embraced each other tightly in the name of love.